Haunted and Historic Australia for our criminals, cutthroats and convicts, part 2 of our first serial killers, John Lynch, the Berrima Axe murderer. John Lynch was born in approximately 1812 in the county of Cavan in Northern Ireland. We understand that his mother died in his teens, and we're not really sure what kind of an upbringing they've had, only that in 1831, when John was 19 years old, things went pear-shaped. His brother Patrick got in trouble for stealing sheep. This may have been because the family was poor and needed money, as many convicts were stealing at this time just to stay alive. But it seems that later on the same year, John and his father are both tried as well, and all three end up being transported to Australia. It could have been that John and his father deliberately got in trouble so that they could be transported to Australia with the brother Patrick, just so the family stayed together after they'd already lost their mother. Or it could have just been by chance they all got in trouble. Either way, by 1832, they are all in New South Wales. It appears that Patrick and his father are both in Sydney, and John is sent south to Berrima to be a ploughman. Not long after arriving in Sydney, Owen Lynch, their father, dies in a Sydney jail in 1834, so it hasn't even really been 2 years since they've all arrived that the father's passed on. In Berrima, John has been assigned to a James Atkinson at Oldbury Farm, which is located in the Bong Bong district near Berrima. The area had only really been established by Governor Macquarie about 10 years before. James Atkinson, born in England, moved to Australia and was a clerk for Governor Macquarie. He did really well and acquired property in the New South Wales South Berrima area. Early on in the 1820s, when the area was established, he named the farm he purchased Oldbury Farm, after where he grew up in England. A few years into working for James Atkinson, there was a bit of trouble on the farm. The overseer, a George Barton, is stopped on one of the district roads where there wasn't any people around. He was beaten by some bushrangers, led by a John Wales, or Watt as he also goes by. He was let go, but George started to drink after this, and when he was sent to the court to testify against those he believed had beaten him up, they couldn't get much sense out of him. He was too drunk. So the charges were dropped, but it wasn't long before John Watt, or Wales, and some of his other gang members were captured and hung shortly afterwards. However, a Thomas Smith, one of the other convicts that was working for James Atkinson, had actually been testifying against Lynch, being part of the group that beat up George Barton. I mean, Barton couldn't say who had beaten him up because he was too intoxicated. And after Smith had been let go, his body was found a couple of days later, being beaten. Around this time, James Atkinson dies, and his widow marries George Barton, so he now becomes the master of Oldbury Farm. It's very strange, the happenings here. We also find that another convict working there, a Michael Hoy, was going to testify about Lynch and Williamson murdering Smith. But his testimony was discredited, as he too had been involved in some shady activities. So far, someone's been murdered, and it doesn't sound like the police could get to the bottom of it. There's too many drunks and shady fellows. Either way, John Lynch was sent away from the farm and to Hyde Park Barracks. They knew something had gone on, and he was like the main suspect. So they sent him off to Hyde Park Barracks for a time. From there, he was sent to a convict stockade gang in Newcastle, where a strange circumstance happens. A Thomas Barry, Thomas Bolston and Charles Wilson are sentenced to transportation for life for stabbing John Lynch in their hut. This was in 1839. We later find out that Lynch made the whole thing up as a revenge against the three who must have crossed him somewhere along the line. Now, for some time, Lynch has actually been trying to get his ticket of leave. He says he's done his time, as he was technically only given 7 years. But it seems that they've put him down for life, and he's not very happy about it. He'd finished his time in Newcastle and was back at Hyde Park Barracks asking for this ticket of leave. When he's kept a fortnight and doesn't get it, he leaves very angrily and heads back to Berrima. Lynch heads down to a mate he knows, a John Mulligan, who has a farm at Wombat's Brush. He's an ex-convict himself, but had been given his ticket of leave and now runs a farm, so he hasn't done too badly for himself. He's been a friend of Lynch's for a while now and was also acted as a fence for him, which means he took in some stolen goods and got rid of it, paid him off. He stayed with Mulligan for a time and then left to visit Oldbury Estate, where he'd previously worked. It was now under the possession of a Thomas Humphrey. At the Oldbury Estate, Lynch stole 8 bullocks from a paddock and began to drive them towards Sydney, with the intention of selling them. He got to an area called Razorback Range, between Stone Quarry and Camden, where he met with a carrier named Edmund Ireland, who'd also been given a ticket of leave. He had a helper, a little Aboriginal boy. Ireland was in charge of a dray laden with produce and its team of bullocks ahead, which were owned by a pastoralist named a Thomas Cowper. At this point, according to Lynch's later confessions, as soon as he met up with these two, Lynch was devising a plan so as he could take their dray with the produce as well as all the bulls they had. Whilst Edmund Ireland was busy doing something else, he lured the little Aboriginal boy and hit him with an axe. He dragged the body into the bush and covered it with rocks and leaves and things. He went back and killed Ireland. Both of them he'd hit with a tomahawk to the back of the head. What a cowardly way to do it. The poor man and the boy never saw what was coming. He remained there at the Razorback campsite for a few days, until he was joined by 2 men driving more stock. Blending in with these 2 now, Lynch made up a friendship with them, and they drove together towards Sydney. Acting as if he was working now for Thomas Cowper, he left those 2 and headed toward Parramatta, where they were meant to meet up with Thomas Cowper. When he arrived, he had to explain the situation as to why he now was bringing the cattle to him, and where Edmund Ireland was. He simply told Thomas Cowper that Ireland had broken his leg and the boy had gone with him to a hospital in Parramatta. Thomas Cowper accepted this explanation and then proceeded on to Sydney to await the arrival of his dray. Lynch took the dray and the stock into Sydney. When he arrived into Sydney, he found a man that was half drunk who paid him for the stock gladly, and he left. After getting rid of the stolen goods, Lynch heads back toward Razorback and Berrima. When he gets to Razorback, he meets up with a horse team belonging to Samuel Bawtry. It was a father and son, both named William Fraser, the son about 20 years old. He decided to travel in their company. They camped for the night at Bargo Brush and later were joined at the camp by 2 other men and a woman travelling in a cart. During the night, a police constable on horseback comes past, asking about a stolen dray from a Mr. Cowper. Lynch is laying underneath this dray, or cart, sleeping, but he hears what's going on, and William Fraser Sr. says to the constable, "Oh, we've not seen any dray like that. Sorry, can't help you." And the police constable moves along, down toward Berrima. And this is where Lynch is heading. So he's got to think fast about what he's going to do. He's deciding maybe he should get rid of this cart and the stock and get rid of the William Frasers also, as they know his little secret. And this could pose a real problem for Lynch. In the morning, Lynch decides to stash away the dray and the bullock, so he takes them into the bush He lets go of these bulls and lets them wander into the forest, and he hides the cart. He gets back to the camp and tells the Frasers that they must have all walked off in the night because he can't find them anywhere. The Frasers let him join them on the way to Berrima. The Frasers make no mention of the cart from here on, so perhaps they don't know that it was Thomas Cowper's dray at all. They camped for a night at Cordo Flat, about 2.5 miles from Berrima. The next morning, being the 16th of August 1841, he accompanied the younger Fraser to look for the horses, who must have walked about. Hiding the tomahawk to the side of his coat, he waited for his opportunity and struck the young man a single blow that felled him like a log of wood. So poetic is this Lynch fella in the way he talks about his murders. So I guess he must have realised that keeping these Frasers around was probably no good anyway. He's taken out Junior, now he goes for the old man, returning to the campsite with a horse, stating that his son's still looking for the other horses. He was biding his time to get at old man Fraser. It didn't take long before the old man bent over for something and he hit him at the back of the head with his tomahawk. Geez, this guy's a coward. He dragged old man Fraser into the bush and buried him with his son under some leaves and twigs and things. It was a bit late in the day now to be doing anything else strenuous, so he decides to camp another night at this spot. The next morning, he goes through Berrima with the stolen horses that he'd taken from the Frasers. He was heading back to Wombat's Brush, to his mate Mulligan. There he knows he's going to get a feed and recover some of the money that he reckons Mulligan owes him. Mulligan was around 60 years old, and his de facto wife Bridget had 2 kids, John 18 and Mary 13, so Mulligan didn't live alone. When Lynch arrived on the 18th, the first thing he brings up to Mulligan is the money that he owes him.
You need to relax.
I
Look, why do you need your money so fast?
Mulligan gives him about £9. It isn't what Lynch says he owes, but he's hoping that that'll keep him happy for now. And remember, Lynch has just killed a heap of people, and he's mad as hell because he didn't get his ticket to leave. With this money that Mulligan's given him, he goes to Edward Gray's Black Horse Inn about 3 miles from Wombat's Brush and picks up 2 bottles of rum. He's conspiring now, and he's still mad as hell. He gets back to Mulligan's farm and puts on a happy face and offers the rum around, making sure not to have too much himself. We can see where this is going. I suppose that's all but poor Mary's. Mary's only 13, so she won't be having any rum. Then again, who knows? This is 200 years ago. Now, Lynch must be watching everyone, and in his rage, he comes up with a plan. He's going to knock this family out. He goes down to the back, calls out to John, the 18-year-old, "Hey mate, come and help me chop some wood." So young John of 18 goes down the back to chop some wood with Lynch, and it isn't long before the young man bends over and Lynch hits him with the axe. He's got a way of doing things and he ain't deviating from it. He's going to knock everyone out from the back of the head. He comes back inside sometime later, probably after he's buried the body under some brush, and tells the family, young John's he's putting the horses to bed for me. And he goes and sits down, probably grabs himself some rum, has a chat. It's been some time now and John hasn't returned. His mum's getting a bit worried at this time. Bridget mentions to Mulligan, "Where's John? He's not back yet. I'm feeling a little uneasy. I'm going to go check it out." Mulligan's a bit worried too, so he goes and gets his gun. And Lynch is watching this all unfold. He knows something's going to go down soon, and this is the time to act. Lynch grabs his axe on the pretense of going and tying up one of their dogs, who must be barking now. Lynch decides to go after Mulligan first and creeps up behind him. You guessed it, back of the head with the axe. Oh, he's sorted out. Some friend Lynch turned out to be. And what a cowardly way to do it, to the back of the head. They've got no way of defending themselves. Now, it's time to go after the girls. He knows there's no way out of it. He's got to take them all out. There can't be anyone left who can point the finger at him. So unfortunately, by now, Bridget's found the body of her son, and he goes down the back to sort her out. He sees her coming up towards the house in the dark, and as she passes him, probably knowing what he's done and trying not to look like she knows, but it doesn't matter, he knows. He trips her up and hits her with the axe, and she's dead. Now, poor Mary, who may even be asleep now, and if she isn't, God, heaven knows what this poor girl's seen so far. This is one of these times that we could just leave the details out, because it's nasty as hell. In a perfect world, she may have been able to reason with him, to let her go, or in some way grab the axe off him and hit him with it, but unfortunately that didn't happen. But what he does now is just truly monstrous, disgusting behaviour, and he deserves everything he gets from hearing. He gathers all the bodies, piles them up, and burns them. Later in his confession, tells of all the details of what he's done, and he just doesn't seem to have any remorse really, not even for poor Mary. Next morning, he gathered the remains of the bodies and clothing and things like that and burnt them in another part of the farm. He burns most of their possessions in the hut as well and pretty much claims it for his own. So he locks the door of the hut and goes into Sydney. And he goes to the Sydney Gazette and takes out an ad under Mulligan's name. In this ad, he states that Bridget had absconded and took his money and warned the public that he would not be accountable for any debts that she racks up on his name. He also wrote several letters to people that he knew Mulligan owed money to, stating that Mulligan had left the farm now, having no money, probably so no one had come looking. He also changes his name from John Lynch to John Dunleavy, and he's gone to the Angel Inn near Parramatta on the Liverpool Road, and he's spoken to William Smith, telling him Mulligan had left and the farm was abandoned, so he's taken it up himself to look after it. He doesn't know if Mulligan's coming back. So now he's got the place to himself, and he decides to go and hire some staff. He locates a Terence Barnett in Appin and his wife Catherine, to whom he invites back to look after his house and work for him, which is good because he'd known them before, but he'd known them as Lynch, and he tells them to call him Dunleavy, so as that now there's a couple of people calling him Dunleavy now. He's not known as Lynch anymore. And it's good to have somebody else at the house just in case someone comes round. Now later he confessed that the Barnett couple were simpletons and that he was safe with them. Perhaps he didn't think that they'd cross him. Anyhow, a man named Gordon came up to the farm one day and he was greeted by Catherine Barnett. He asked if anyone was at home, as he'd known the Mulligans, and she said, "Oh, only the boy." And to which she came round the back and called out to Lynch, or Dunleavy as he's known now. Dunleavy comes up and speaks to Gordon. And Gordon says, "Hey, I thought she was calling young John." To which Dunleavy responds, "Oh no, he's had some trouble in Goulburn and the family's gone there to look after him. I'm here looking after the house now." This seemed to satisfy Gordon and he left. Now, by December 1841, the authorities have found the cart and they suspect that the men are all dead. Edmund Ireland and the young unnamed Aboriginal boy, and even the missing duo, father and son team William Frasers, and their horses, who haven't been heard of for days. And there's a reward of £25 offered to any free person who might have some information leading up to what has happened. But they haven't found any of the bodies. They're pretty certain though it's murder. Now, John Dunleavy, we're going to call him Dunleavy now, just so you're all aware. John Lynch is now John Dunleavy. So, John Dunleavy goes into Sydney on business with a horse and cart that he's borrowed from Mulligan. Along the way, he stops in at Razorback, where he's familiar with now, and meets up with a Kearns Landrigan, who's 27 years old. And for some reason, he must strike up a conversation with this fella and thinks on the spot that he might be good for working around his property, Mulligan's property. So he invites him back, and they jump on the horse and cart and head back towards Wombat's Brush. Along the way, they must get talking, and he changes his mind. For some reason, he decides that he doesn't want this fella coming back to his place, and he doesn't want him working for him anymore. So, yep, back of the head with a tomahawk. And he dumps his body to the side of the road under some brush, and has the intention of coming back and maybe burying him later. Maybe he's feeling like he's going to come undone. But he doesn't do it right at that moment. And that's probably where he falls apart here. Because the body's found only a few days later by someone else passing through the same stretch of land. And the body's identified as Landrigan. It's not known really why he's done this. He wanted to hire the guy and probably chatted to him for a little while. Decided that, no, he's not a very good fit. Oh, I've got to get rid of this guy, he knows me now. And thumped him. Now, everything would have been okay, except they must have stopped somewhere along the line at a pub and had a drink, because the publican there remembers Dunleavy being with the victim. And here we go, the beginning of the end. So it's the downfall of Lynch, Dunleavy, take your pick. The publican takes the police to Wombat's Brush because he's been telling everybody where he lives and that he owns it now, and the Mulligans have gone. So everyone knows where to find him. And upon arrival, they search the property. They find a belt belonging to Landrigan and various other stolen property belonging to other people. So at this point, they also find out that his real name's Lynch. And they know that a John Lynch was involved in the murder of Thomas Smith at Oldbury Farm all those years ago. And he was sent to Hyde Park. So they know the Lynch name. They didn't know Dunleavy. But now that they've made the connection, they're now suspecting him for all the other murders that he's committed, including the Mulligans, considering that they've disappeared. So it isn't long before thorough searches are being made. Now the whole town of Berrima and the surrounds are all getting to know about this happening. And the neighbour, Gordon, comes forward and says, "Hey, I was there, and he had a fire in the backyard. I wonder if that has anything to do with it." And of course it did. The good old fire pit where he was burning all of their possessions and clothing and stuff. He's going down. Another thing was that Cowper was brought forward, and he noticed that Lynch had been wearing some of Edmund Island's property. He thought he saw his gun and his velveteen waistcoat. So he's reported that to police. Everyone's coming out of the woodwork now, accusing him of everything. He's going down. There's never been such a joyous occasion as finding out that Lynch is going down for all these murders, including poor little Mary. I want him to suffer for that one. On the 21st of March 1842, before a jury and Justice James Dowling, he was charged for the willful murder of Kearns Landrigan, which he pleaded not guilty to. There were so many people at the trial, and it lasted 12 hours. Some of these people had come 30 miles or more to come and see this horrible monster. Justice James Dowling concluded in his speech how vile this creature was and that he would be hung. There was actually a little bit of a ruckus going on in Berrima because they were talking about, back in Oldbury, there were a lot of newspapers saying how George Barton could have put this monster away had he not been drunk back in 1836, and it would have saved all these deaths from happening. So they started attacking George Barton as well. Throughout the trial, it was known that Lynch pleaded not guilty to everything, right up until the moment before he was going to be hung. Reverend Summers came to him and he admitted to everything, a full confession. Possibly he thought it was going to help him through the pearly gates, but no chance. Extensive details of his confession were published after his execution. Even though Magistrate George Bowen had already located human remains on the farm, after Lynch had confessed before he was hung, he was taken to Mulligan's farm on the evening before his execution, and he was able to point out where the family's remains were kind of scattered. John Lynch was executed by hanging on the 22nd of April 1842. It was on a temporary gallows at the back of the new jail in Berrima, probably their current jail now. Lynch's demeanour was said to have not flinched, definitely not looked like anyone with any kind of remorse or contrition for his previous dreadful life. In the aftermath, the bodies of both Fraser men were found where John Lynch said that they'd be. They were buried at the All Saints Anglican Churchyard at Sutton's Forest on the 4th of May 1842. Also buried there on the same day was John Mulligan and his family. The Berrima police also went to Razorback to try and find the remains of Ireland and the Aboriginal boy, but no trace could be found. It was presumed that possibly dingoes had taken them. However, a further search was made and the bones were found on the 10th of May. In 2019, the Berrima District Historical and Family History Society installed a plaque in the graveyard of All Saints Anglican Church at Sutton Forest to mark the graves of the 6 local victims of John Lynch: Thomas Smith, John and Bridget Mulligan, Bridget's 2 children, John and Mary, and Kearns Landrigan. The plaque was unveiled on the 8th of September 2019. The plaque didn't have William Sr. or Jr. on it. This was because the victims were all buried next to them and they had already had a plaque set up. I think it's lovely that they've got this plaque in their memory. So much life's been wasted. And for what? Anything that Lynch could gain. He was truly a monster, and this is why I've tied him with Thomas Jeffries for part 2 of the first serial killer of Australia. The both of them hung, and they've gone down in history, the first to spill blood on this soil as serial killers. We do hope you've enjoyed these episodes on the first serial killers of Australia. Stay tuned for our next episode, which also occurred in the Berrima area around the time of John Lynch. She was the temptress, and we'll find out exactly what she got up to next episode. Now don't forget to like, subscribe, share and smack that notification bell so you're aware when we're putting up more gruesome episodes.